The year was 2011. The Arab Spring swept across North Africa and the Middle East. It was a time of hope and upheaval. In Syria, long-simmering frustrations with Bashar al-Assad's regime boiled over. Protests erupted, demanding political reforms and greater freedoms. The government's response was swift and brutal. Security forces opened fire on demonstrators, igniting a cycle of violence that would plunge Syria into a devastating civil war. The conflict quickly escalated into a complex web of factions vying for control. Rebels, united in their opposition to Assad but divided in their ideologies, took up arms against the regime. Foreign powers, each with their own agendas, poured fuel on the fire, arming and supporting their chosen proxies. The Syrian people became trapped in a nightmare, their country torn apart by violence and bloodshed. As the conflict raged on, a new threat emerged from the chaos: the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. This brutal extremist group seized control of vast swaths of territory in Syria and neighboring Iraq, imposing its reign of terror on the local population. The rise of ISIS in 2014 sent shockwaves across the world. Images of their barbarity, their public executions and enslavement of minorities filled television screens and newspapers. The group's rapid territorial gains in Syria and Iraq, coupled with its stated goal of establishing a global caliphate, sparked alarm bells in Western capitals. The United States, under the Obama administration, faced a growing chorus of calls for action to confront this new threat. The U.S. had been hesitant to get deeply involved in the Syrian Civil War, wary of repeating the mistakes of Iraq. However, the threat posed by ISIS was deemed too great to ignore. The group's control of strategically important territory, its vast resources from captured oil fields, and its recruitment of foreign fighters, presented a clear and present danger to U.S. interests and regional stability. Reluctantly, but with a sense of urgency, the United States prepared for a new military intervention in the Middle East. The U.S. had several key goals in Syria. First and foremost was the degradation and eventual destruction of ISIS. This would require a multi-pronged approach including military action, cutting off the group's financing, and countering its propaganda. Secondly, the U.S. sought to support what it deemed moderate rebel groups fighting against the Assad regime. This proved to be a challenging and often frustrating endeavor, as the lines between moderate and extremist groups were often blurred. Finally, the U.S. aimed to contain the influence of Iran and Russia, both of whom were staunch allies of the Assad regime. The Syrian conflict had become a proxy war, a tangled web of competing interests that would shape the future of the Middle East. As the U.S. geared up for its intervention, it was clear that this would be a long and difficult campaign, with no easy answers and the potential for unforeseen consequences. In September 2014, the United States, along with a coalition of partner nations, launched airstrikes against ISIS targets in Syria. This marked a significant escalation of U.S. involvement in the conflict and the beginning of a long and costly air campaign. The Obama administration stressed that the U.S. was not at war with Syria, but rather with ISIS, which it deemed a threat to the entire region and beyond. The airstrikes carried out by U.S. fighter jets and drones targeted a range of ISIS assets including command and control centers, training camps, oil infrastructure, and weapons depots. The goal was to cripple the group's ability to operate, disrupt its financing, and ultimately degrade its fighting capacity. The US-led coalition also provided air support to local ground forces battling ISIS, including the Iraqi army, Kurdish Peshmerga fighters, and Syrian rebel groups. The air campaign against ISIS was initially met with some success. The group's momentum was slowed, and it began to lose territory it had captured. However, it soon became clear that airstrikes alone would not be sufficient to defeat ISIS. The group proved to be resilient, adapting its tactics and using civilians as human shields to deter further attacks. The U.S. and its allies realized that a more comprehensive strategy would be needed, one that involved supporting local ground forces and addressing the underlying political and sectarian tensions that fueled ISIS's rise. Recognizing the limitations of air power alone, the U.S. adopted a strategy of supporting local ground forces in their fight against ISIS. This involved providing training, weapons, and logistical support to a variety of groups, including the Iraqi army, Kurdish Peshmerga fighters in Iraq, and a patchwork of Syrian rebel groups. The goal was to empower these local actors to take the lead in the fight against ISIS, while minimizing the need for direct U.S. military intervention. The U.S. initially focused on supporting what it deemed moderate Syrian rebel groups, hoping to bolster a viable alternative to both the Assad regime and extremist factions like ISIS. However, this proved to be a difficult and often frustrating endeavor. The Syrian opposition was deeply fragmented, with a bewildering array of groups with varying ideologies and allegiances. Efforts to identify and arm moderate rebels were hampered by infighting, shifting alliances, and the infiltration of extremist elements. As the conflict dragged on, the U.S. shifted its focus towards supporting the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, a Kurdish-led militia that proved to be the most effective fighting force against ISIS in Syria. The SDF, with its secular ideology and disciplined fighters, became a key ally in the fight against ISIS, liberating vast swaths of territory from the group's control. However, this alliance would create tensions with Turkey, a NATO ally that viewed the SDF as an extension of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, a group it considered a terrorist organization. The complexities of the Syrian conflict and the shifting alliances of local actors presented a constant challenge for U.S. policymakers, forcing them to make difficult choices with often unintended consequences. Section 5. Boots on the ground. U.S. Special Forces enter the fray. While the United States remained reluctant to commit large numbers of ground troops to Syria, it did deploy small teams of Special Operations Forces to support the fight against ISIS. These elite soldiers, operating largely in secret, played a crucial role in coordinating airstrikes, gathering intelligence, and advising and assisting local partner forces. Their presence on the ground underscored the United States' commitment to defeating ISIS, but also highlighted the risks and complexities of American involvement in the Syrian quagmire. The Special Forces, drawn from units like the Army Green Berets and Navy SEALs, were highly trained and equipped for unconventional warfare. They worked closely with local forces, providing training, tactical advice, and calling in airstrikes when needed. Their presence on the ground allowed for more precise targeting of ISIS and helped to improve the effectiveness of the air campaign. However, it also put American boots on the ground in a war zone, raising the stakes for the United States and increasing the risk of casualties. The deployment of special forces was a controversial aspect of the U.S. involvement in Syria. Critics argued that it represented mission creep, gradually drawing the United States deeper into a conflict with no clear exit strategy. They also raised concerns about the lack of transparency surrounding the Special Forces' activities and the potential for them to be drawn into direct combat with ISIS, despite the Obama administration's insistence that the United States would not engage in ground combat operations. Section 6. Chemical Warfare and Retaliation. U.S. Strikes on Assad. In April 2017, the world watched in horror as images emerged from the Syrian town of Khan Sheikhoun, showing the aftermath of a horrific chemical weapons attack. The Assad regime was widely believed to be responsible for the attack, which killed dozens of civilians, including children. The use of chemical weapons, a blatant violation of international law, crossed a red line for the Trump administration, which had previously shown little appetite for challenging Assad's rule. In response to the Khan Sheikhoun attack, the U.S. launched a missile strike against the Shayrat air base, from where the Syrian government was believed to have launched the chemical attack. The strike, while limited in scope, marked a significant escalation of U.S. involvement in the Syrian conflict, targeting Assad's forces directly for the first time. The Trump administration defended the strike as a necessary and proportionate response to the use of chemical weapons, arguing that it was essential to deter further atrocities. The U.S. carried out a second round of strikes against Syrian government targets in April 2018, following another alleged chemical weapons attack, this time in the town of Douma. The strikes, conducted in coordination with France and the United Kingdom, targeted facilities associated with Syria's chemical weapons program. However, these strikes did little to deter the Assad regime, which, with the support of Russia and Iran, continued to gain ground in the civil war. The use of chemical weapons and the U.S. response underscored the brutal nature of the Syrian conflict and the complex moral and strategic dilemmas it posed for the international community. Section 7. Shifting alliances, Turkish-Kurdish tensions, and U.S. withdrawal. As the U.S. focused on combating ISIS, a new challenge emerged that would further complicate its involvement in Syria: the escalating tensions between Turkey and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF. Turkey, a NATO ally, viewed the SDF as an extension of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, known as the PKK, a group it considered a terrorist organization. The U.S. alliance with the SDF, while militarily effective against ISIS, put it at odds with Turkey, a key regional player. In 2019, the Trump administration made the controversial decision to withdraw U.S. troops from northeastern Syria, paving the way for a Turkish military offensive against the SDF. The withdrawal, widely criticized as a betrayal of a U.S. ally, threw the region into chaos and allowed ISIS to regroup and launch new attacks. The Turkish offensive, while militarily successful, displaced thousands of civilians and further destabilized an already volatile region. The U.S. withdrawal from northeastern Syria highlighted the challenges of balancing competing interests in a complex conflict. The U.S. found itself caught between its commitment to fighting ISIS and its relationship with Turkey, a NATO ally with its own security concerns. The decision to withdraw, while intended to extricate the U.S. from a messy conflict, had the unintended consequence of empowering adversaries like ISIS and further complicating the already tangled web of alliances and rivalries in Syria. Section 8. A New Dawn in Damascus, the Fall of Assad, and the Rise of Hope. The year 2024 brought a dramatic turn of events in the Syrian conflict. With Russia and Iran preoccupied with other geopolitical crises, the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas war respectively, a window of opportunity emerged for the Syrian opposition. In a surprise offensive launched in late November, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a coalition of Islamist rebel groups, swiftly captured Damascus, sending shockwaves across the region. Assad's grip on power, weakened by years of war and international sanctions, finally crumbled. On December 8, 2024, after over a decade of brutal rule, Bashar al-Assad fled to Russia, marking the end of his family's decades-long dynasty. The fall of Assad, once considered an unlikely prospect, signaled a potential turning point in the Syrian tragedy, raising hopes for a negotiated settlement and an end to the long and bloody conflict. In the aftermath of Assad's fall, an interim government was formed, led by Mohammed al-Bashir as prime minister and Ahmed al-Sharaa as president. The new government, while facing immense challenges, pledged to restore stability, rebuild the shattered nation, and work towards a political solution that would address the grievances of all Syrians. Crucially, an agreement was reached with the SDF, integrating Kurdish forces into the national army and guaranteeing Kurdish rights, a significant step towards healing the deep divisions within Syrian society. Section 9. Scars of War, Seeds of Peace, Syria's Uncertain Future. As Syria emerges from the shadow of Bashar al-Assad, it faces a long and arduous road to recovery. The scars of war run deep, etched into the landscape and the soul of the nation. Millions remain displaced, their homes and lives shattered by years of conflict. The economy lies in ruins, crippled by sanctions, corruption, and the destruction of infrastructure. The humanitarian crisis, exacerbated by a devastating earthquake in 2023, continues to plague the country, with millions in dire need of food, shelter, and medical care. Despite the immense challenges, there are glimmers of hope. The fall of Assad, while ushering in a new set of uncertainties, also presents an opportunity for a fresh start, a chance to build a more inclusive and democratic Syria. The interim government, though fragile, represents a step towards political reconciliation. The agreement with the SDF, if implemented effectively, could serve as a model for resolving long-standing ethnic and sectarian tensions. The international community has a crucial role to play in supporting Syria's reconstruction and reconciliation. Humanitarian aid, economic assistance, and diplomatic engagement will be essential to help Syria heal and rebuild. However, the path ahead remains fraught with challenges. The remnants of ISIS, though territorially defeated, continue to pose a security threat. Regional powers, with their competing interests, could exploit Syria's fragility, further destabilizing the country. The legacy of Assad's brutality and the deep divisions within Syrian society will take time and effort to overcome. The road ahead will be long and arduous, but with determination, international support, and a shared commitment to peace, Syria can emerge from the ashes of war, a beacon of hope and resilience for a region yearning for stability and prosperity.